The grand chamber of the Valkyran Synod was not built for silence, yet silence was the only thing that filled it now, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against the gilded ribs of the vaulted ceiling. It was a silence born not of peace, but of a terror so absolute that it had choked the breath from the throats of the galaxy's most powerful leaders. The air in the chamber was stale, recycled too many times, thick with the pheromones of fear and the metallic tang of ozone bleeding from the overtaxed shielding generators deep within the planet's crust. High Exarch Valen sat upon the obsidian throne, his 4 hands gripping the armrests with enough force to whiten the chitinous plates of his knuckles. He was old, his carapace faded to the dull gray of storm clouds, etched with the scars of 300 cycles of governance. But never in all the blood-soaked history of the Synod had he faced a moment like this. The holographic projection in the center of the room, a swirling sphere of terrified data, showed the encroach of the abyssal tide, the Xylth. They were not merely an army. They were a biological plague, a hive mind that did not conquer worlds but consumed them, leaving behind only dust and the echoing screams of the dead. To Valen's right sat the war-cast Primarch Korth, a massive creature of muscle and aggression, currently reduced to a trembling statue of impotent rage. To his left was the science minister, Lisha, whose compound eyes were fixed on the floor, unable to look at the doom projected above. The Synod had fleets. They had dreadnoughts capable of cracking moons. They had armies numbering in the billions, and none of it mattered. The Xylth adapted. They swarmed. They turned the Synod's own energy weapons into food, absorbing plasma and kinetic impacts with a biological adaptability that defied the laws of physics. The Synod was losing. In a week, perhaps less, the homeworld of Valkar would be nothing more than a husk. And in this moment of utter despair, the heavy doors of the chamber groaned open, the sound echoing like a thunderclap in the quiet. Valen looked up, expecting a messenger with news of another fallen sector. Instead, he saw the humans. They were small. That was always the first thing Valen thought when he saw them. Soft-skinned, bipedal, lacking natural armor or claws, they looked unfinished, like larvae pulled too early from the cocoon. There were 3 of them dressed in the dark, utilitarian uniforms of their Terran Union, devoid of the ornamentation and sashes that the Synod adored. They walked with a strange, fluid grace, their steps silent on the polished stone floor. Leading them was Ambassador Silas Thorn, a man whose hair was the color of iron and whose eyes held a stillness that unnerved Valen more than the screaming holograms of the war. Thorn did not look like a warrior. He looked like a librarian or perhaps an undertaker. He stopped 10 paces from the throne, flanked by 2 others, a woman with cybernetic implants tracing her jawline and a man carrying a heavy, sealed case. They did not bow. They did not show fear. They simply stood there, radiating a calm that felt almost insulting in the face of the apocalypse. "High Exarch," Thorn said, his voice soft but carrying perfectly in the acoustic perfection of the chamber. "We received your distress call. We understand the Xylth have breached the inner rim." Valen let out a breath that was half sigh, half growl. You understand nothing, human. The inner rim is gone. The 7th Fleet is ash. The defenses are crumbling. You send 3 people. Where are your battleships? Where are the kinetic drivers you promised? Where is the might of Terra?" "Terra is far," Thorn replied, his tone even unbothered by the Exarch's anger. "And conventional fleets will not stop the Xylth. You know this. Your dreadnoughts are merely larger meals for them. We did not come to join a firing line that is already dead. We came to offer a solution." Primarch Korth slammed a fist onto the table, the sound cracking the air. "A solution? You are barely a spacefaring species. Your technology is primitive, your engines are slow, your shields are porous. What solution can you offer that the Synod Science Directorate has not already attempted?" Thorn turned his gaze to Korth. It was a slow movement, deliberate. "We request access to the Othra." The silence returned, but this time it was confused. Valen blinked, his mandibles twitching. "The Othra," he repeated, sure he had misheard. "You mean the last lament, the salvage hulk." "The Othra," Thorn confirmed. "The heavy cruiser commissioned 4,000 cycles ago, the one sitting in your orbital scrapyard slated for deconstruction." Laughter, bitter and incredulous, bubbled up from the assembled counselors. It was a harsh, clicking sound. Lisha looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Ambassador, the Othra is a relic. It was built before the discovery of hyperfocused plasma. Its hull is lead and tritanium, heavy and brittle. Its reactor is a fission-fusion hybrid that leaks radiation. It has no targeting computers compatible with modern warfare. It is the weakest ship in the fleet, if one can even call it a ship anymore. It is a coffin." It is a hull, Thorn corrected gently. And it has mass, it has history, that is all we require. Grant us command of the Othra, give us 48 standard hours and full autonomy in the orbital dock. Do this and we will halt the Xylth. Valen looked at the human, searching for the madness that must be hiding behind those pale eyes. But there was no madness. There was only a terrifying, cold logic. The humans were not asking for a dreadnought. They were asking for trash. They wanted the garbage of the Synod. Why, Valen asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Why that ship? We have destroyers in reserve. We have experimental frigates. Because, Thorn said, and for the first time a shadow seemed to pass over his face, a darkening of his expression that made him look ancient. Modern ships are built to kill. The Othra. The Othra was built to endure. And what we intend to do requires a vessel that understands the weight of ghosts. Do we have an accord, Exarch? Or shall we return to Terra and watch your fires burn from the safety of the void? Valen looked at the hologram. The red stain of the Xylth was spreading. He had no choice. He had no hope. If the humans wanted to die in a rusted bucket of bolts, let them. It would buy the Synod perhaps a few seconds of distraction. Take it, Valen said, waving a hand in dismissal. Take the Othra, and may your gods have mercy on you, for the Xylth will have none. Thorn nodded once. We do not bring gods to this fight, Exarch, we bring something else. The orbital shipyards of Valkar were a graveyard of giants. Skeletal frames of decommissioned warships floated in the hard vacuum, stripped of their armor and engines, drifting like the bones of leviathans picked clean by scavengers. In the darkest corner of the yard, tethered by rusting magnetic clamps, lay the Othra. It was ugly. There was no other word for it. In an age of sleek, aerodynamic curves and shimmering energy fields, the Othra was a brick. It was a massive, blocky slab of dark metal, pitted by micrometeoroids, its one-sprout insignia faded to an unrecognizable smear. It leaked low-level radiation that made the sensors of the nearby drones fuzzy with static. It smelled, even through the vacuum-sealed suits of the docking crews, of old grease and decay. When the human shuttle docked, the Valkaran engineers watching from the control tower expected a crew of hundreds to pour out, technicians, soldiers, loaders. Instead, only 12 humans emerged. 12. They carried toolkits that looked archaic, dragged crates of equipment that lacked the smooth, glowing interfaces of Synod technology. They moved with a terrifying efficiency. There were no shouts, no wasted movements. They boarded the Othra like surgeons entering a theater. Overseer Grault, the Synod dockmaster, watched the monitors with a mixture of pity and annoyance. They are wasting their time, he clicked to his subordinate. The reactor core is unstable. The weapon mounts are fused. What can they possibly do in 2 days? Polish the rust. But as the hours ticked by, the readings from the Othra began to change. And they were wrong. First, the humans jettisoned the weapons. All of them. The massive kinetic railguns, the dormant missile tubes, the point defense lasers, they were cut loose, drifting away into the void. Grault watched, stunned. They are disarming the ship. Are they surrendering before they even launch? Then came the stripping of the armor. The humans were removing the outer plating, exposing the structural ribs of the vessel. They were making it lighter, yes, but also naked. A single stray shot from a Xylth interceptor would tear the ship in half. They are mad, Grault whispered. They are suicidally mad. But then the crates were opened. The humans began to install things. They were not weapons. They were not shield generators. They looked like massive black monoliths, pillars of a dark, matte material that seemed to absorb the light around them. They were bolted directly onto the exposed structural keel of the ship, integrated into the very spine of the vessel. There were thousands of cables, thick as a Valkaran's torso, running from the unstable reactor core directly into these monoliths. The energy signature of the Othra shifted. It didn't spike in the way a powering weapon would. It dropped. The ship began to grow cold. Not just physically cold, but thermodynamically impossibly cold. The sensors indicated that the vessel was acting like a heat sink, drawing thermal energy from the surrounding space and feeding it into the black pillars. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was changing. Commander Thorn stood on the bridge, WH. It had been stripped of its command chairs and tactical displays. In their place was a single raised platform surrounded by banks of analog instruments, dials, switches, sliders. It looked less like a bridge and more like the cockpit of a primitive deep-sea submersible or a cathedral organ. Status, Thorn said. His voice echoed in the stripped-down hull. Resonance chambers locked at 90%, came the voice of Chief Engineer Vance from the engineering bay deep below. The entropy drive is coming online. The reactor is screaming, Commander. We're pushing it past safety limits. It's leaking hard radiation into the lower decks. Vent the lower decks, Thorne said, his face impassive. We don't need life support down there. Direct all power to the Requiem array. Understood. Harmonics are stabilizing, Commander. This ship is groaning. The metal is old. If we hit full resonance, she might shake herself apart. She'll hold, Thorne said, running his hand over the cold metal of the console. She's been waiting for this. She's tired of being scrap. She wants to sing one last time. Back in the control tower, Gralt's eyes widened as the Othra changed color. It wasn't paint. The ship was turning black. A profound, absolute black. The light from the nearby sun hit the hull and simply vanished. The vessel looked like a hole in the universe, a silhouette cut from the fabric of reality. What have they done? Gralt whispered. That isn't a ship anymore, it's a shadow. The 48 hours expired. The Xylth Vanguard entered the system. The battle for Valkar was brief and brutal. The Synod fleet, desperate and terrified, formed a defensive wall around the planet. They fired everything they had. Beams of coherent light slashed the darkness, antimatter warheads blossomed like miniature stars, and the Xylth swarm simply flowed around it. They were organic ships, massive, pulsing, distinct entities that moved with a fluid coordination. They absorbed the energy blasts, their carapaces glowing momentarily before retaliating with streams of corrosive acid and boarding spores. One by one, the Synod dreadnoughts went dark, their crews consumed, their hulls repurposed into biomass for the hive. Exarch Valen watched from the surface, his heart turning to stone. It was over. The sky was filling with the shapes of the enemy. Where are the humans? Primarch Korth roared, smashing a console. Where is their garbage scow? They lied to us, they fled. No, Lisha whispered, pointing at a sensor screen that was showing a strange anomaly. Look. From the orbital shipyard, a void was moving. It was invisible to visual scanners because it reflected no light, but the background stars were being blotted out by its passage. The Othra was moving. It had no engine flare. It had no exhaust. It moved with a ghostly inertia, drifting straight toward the heart of the Xylth swarm. It has no weapons hot, a technician shouted. No shield emissions, it's naked. It's heading for the Hive Queen, Valen realized. They are going to ram it. But the Othra did not ram. It stopped. It positioned itself directly in the center of the invading armada, a tiny speck of absolute darkness surrounded by millions of bioships. The Xylth ignored it. To them, it registered as debris, a dead hulk with no biological signature and no threat profile. They swarmed past it, their hunger focused on the planet below. On the bridge of the Othra, Thorne closed his eyes. He placed his hands on the console. Vance, he said softly, unleash the choir. Initiating, Vance replied. The humans didn't fire a laser. They didn't launch a missile. They played a sound. It started as a hum, a vibration that was felt rather than heard. It resonated through the hull of the Othra, transmitted through the vacuum not by air, but by the sheer gravitational manipulation of the black monoliths. The Requiem array was not a conventional weapon. It was a gravimetric sonic device, capable of translating acoustic frequency into gravitational waves. The hum grew. It became a note, a low, mournful, chest-rattling C minor that seemed to stretch into infinity. And then the universe screamed. From the Othra, a wave of distortion erupted. It was visible as a ripple in starlight, a concussive sphere of pure force that expanded outward. But it wasn't chaotic. It was structured. It was music. The humans were broadcasting a requiem, a complex, mathematically perfect symphony of sorrow, amplified to the point where it warped space-time. The effect on the Xylth was instantaneous and catastrophic. The Xylth were a hive mind, connected by a delicate biological quantum entanglement. They relied on a synchronized frequency to communicate, to fly, to exist. The Requiem didn't burn them. It didn't blow them up. It drowned them. The gravitational waves slammed into the delicate organic crystals inside the Xylth ships. The frequency was perfectly tuned to the resonant pitch of their neural lattice. Exarch Valen watched in stunned disbelief as the Xylth fleet simply stopped. The fluid grace of the swarm shattered. Ships collided with one another. The massive Hive Queen began to convulse. The coordination was gone. The silence of the hive was broken by the overwhelming volume of the human song. It's a song, Lisha whispered, tears leaking from her compound eyes. They are playing a funeral dirge. The Othra was vibrating so violently now that the bolts holding the hull together were shearing off. But the black monoliths held. The song grew louder, more complex. It wasn't just noise. It was an imposition of human emotion onto physical reality. It was the sound of grief, of loss, of the inevitable end of all things. The humans were weaponizing the concept of mortality. The Xylth ships began to rupture, not from explosives, but because their internal structures could not withstand the vibration. Their biological hulls liquefied. The neural feedback loop, overwhelmed by the sorrow encoded in the signal, caused the creatures inside to go catatonic. The swarm, the unstoppable devourer of worlds, was being sung to death. But on the bridge, Thorn was bleeding. The acoustic pressure, even inside the dampening fields, was rupturing capillaries. He didn't let go of the controls. He adjusted the pitch, sweeping the frequency higher, targeting the Queen directly. "Commander," Vance's voice was a static-filled scream. "The reactor is critical, the core is going to breach. We have to cut the signal." "Not yet," Thorn whispered, blood trickling from his nose. "Let them hear the finale." He slammed the sliders forward. The Othra groaned, a sound like a dying god, and unleashed a pulse of dark energy that turned the space around it into a kaleidoscope of fractured gravity. The Hive Queen detonated. It didn't explode in fire, it imploded. The gravitational shear crushed it into a sphere of meat and chitin the size of a moon, then compressed it further until it was nothing but dust. The feedback shockwave traveled through the hive link. Across the system, every Xylth organism seized and died. The swarm fell silent, drifting aimlessly in the void. Then the Othra went dark. The song ended. The ship, its structural integrity finally compromised, broke its keel. It didn't explode. It simply cracked open, drifting in two massive, silent pieces amidst the graveyard it had created. The rescue crews from Valkar found the humans alive, encased in emergency stasis pods within the wreckage of the bridge. They were battered, bruised, and suffering from acute radiation sickness, but they were alive. When Thorn was revived in the grand medical bay of the Synod, he found Valen standing over him. The High Exarch looked different. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a profound, terrified awe. "You are awake," Valen said softly. Thorn tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy. "The Xylth." "Gone," Valen said. "Dead, all of them, the signal you broadcast." It traveled through their network. "We are receiving reports from other sectors. The Xylth in the outer rim are dead. The ones in the nebula are dead. You killed the entire species, Ambassador, with a song." Thorn laid back, staring at the sterile white ceiling. "Not a song, a requiem." "I do not understand," Valen said, his voice trembling. "We have studied war for 10,000 years. We have built weapons that can pierce stars, but you turned a garbage scow into a device that broke the will of a hive mind. How? What technology is this?" "It's not technology, Exarch," Thorn rasped. "It's psychology. The Xylth are a hive. They know only unity. They know only the present. They don't understand loss. They don't understand the individual. We introduced them to the concept of grief. We forced them to feel the weight of their own mortality. Their minds couldn't handle the isolation. We didn't just kill them. We made them realize they were alone." Valen stared at the small, fragile human. "You weaponized sadness." "We are humans," Thorn said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "We are experts in it. We have spent our entire history mourning. We build monuments to the dead. We sing songs for them. We carry our ghosts with us. You aliens, you try to forget death. You hide from it with your shields and your long lives. We embrace it. And because we embrace it, we can wield it." The Exarch was silent for a long time. Then he bowed, a deep, formal bow that no High Exarch had ever offered to another species. "The Synod owes you a debt that cannot be paid. The Othra. It will be memorialized. We will leave the wreckage where it is. A monument." "Good," Thorn said. "Let it be a warning." "A warning to whom? The Xylth are gone." Thorn closed his eyes. To whatever the Xylth were running from. Valen froze. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What did you say?" Thorn opened his eyes, and the look in. Then was the same cold, abyssal stare he had worn in the council chamber. The Xylth were a plague, yes, but they were migrating. A hive mind doesn't run unless it is being hunted. When we activated the Requiem, when we listened to the feedback from their network, we heard it. Beneath the scream of the Xylth, there was something else. A silence deeper than the void. "You think there is something else out there?" "I know there is," Thorn said. "And the Requiem, it wasn't just a weapon, it was a dinner bell. We rang it loud enough to clear the infestation, but sound travels, Exarch. It travels a long way. Valen looked out the window at the stars, which suddenly seemed colder, more hostile than before. Then what do we do? We prepare, Thorn said, struggling to sit up again. We rebuild, and you give us more ships, not the new ones. Give us the old ones, the broken ones, the ones with ghosts. Why? Because, Thorn said, looking at his shaking hands, the thing that is coming, lasers won't hurt it, plasma won't burn it, but if we can make it feel, if we can make it understand the sorrow of 1 billion years of war, maybe, just maybe, we can make it weep. The weeks that followed the Battle of the Requiem were a time of frenetic, terrifying activity. The Synod, once a slow, bureaucratic beast, moved with the desperation of a creature that had seen its own death. The humans were no longer treated as curiosities or junior partners. They were given the keys to the kingdom. The Othra became a holy site. Alien pilgrims traveled to the drift point to look at the two halves of the black ship, floating in the silence. They said that if you turned your comms off and just listened to the static of the universe, you could still hear the echo of the song, a low, haunting melody that made you want to curl up and weep. But in the shipyards, the work was different. The humans, now numbering in the thousands as reinforcements arrived from Terra, were not building dreadnoughts. They were building instruments. They took the hulls of the Vengeance, the Starbreaker, and the Eternal, ships that had been retired after the Great Crusades, and they gutted them. They filled them with the black monoliths. They installed the resonance chambers. They turned the fleet of the Synod into an orchestra. High Exarch Valen walked through the gantries of the main dock, accompanied by Thorn, who had recovered but walked with a cane. The radiation had taken a toll on his bone marrow, but he refused to retire. They are ugly, Valen noted, gesturing to the fleet of blackened, blocky ships. They look like coffins. They are, Thorn said. That's the point, the enemy that is coming. We call them the silencers. Our theoretical physicists have been analyzing the data from the Xylth mines. And they are entropic entities, Thorn explained. They don't consume biomass. They consume complexity. They unravel the laws of physics. They turn matter into energy and energy into nothing. They are the heat death of the universe given form. Valen shuddered. How do you fight entropy? You don't fight it, Thorn said. You can't shoot entropy, but entropy is the loss of information. It's the slide into chaos. Music. Music is the opposite of entropy. It is structure imposed on chaos. It is meaning created from noise. We are going to build a wall of sound so complex, so dense with information and emotion that the silencers will choke on it. You are betting the survival of the galaxy on a symphony, Valen said, shaking his head. It worked on the Xylth. The Xylth were biological. They had ears in a manner of speaking. These silencers, they are cosmic forces. Everything vibrates, Exarch, Thorn said. Atoms vibrate, strings vibrate. Reality is just a frequency. If we play the right chord, we can rewrite the script. It took 6 months for the threat to arrive. It didn't appear on sensors. It appeared as a vanishing. Stars in the distant cluster simply went out. Not exploded, not obscured, gone, deleted. The darkness was eating the light. The Synod fleet, now led by the human-modified Requiem Armada, gathered at the edge of the galactic rim. There were 300 ships, all painted the same light-absorbing black, all drifting in a formation that looked less like a battle line and more like a musical staff. Valen stood on the bridge of the flagship, the Eventide, a massive carrier converted into the central conductor's podium. Thorn sat at the great organ console in the center. They are here, Lisha announced, her voice trembling. The darkness is accelerating. It is not moving through space. It is deleting space. It will reach us in 10 minutes. Hold position, Thorn ordered. Link the fleet. Synchronize the resonance drives. Across the void, 300 ships locked their systems together. The power accumulation was staggering. The combined output of 300. Red warp cores was being channeled not into engines, but into the emitters. The darkness approached. It was a wall of nothingness, a horizon of absolute erasure. Where it touched an asteroid, the asteroid didn't break, it simply ceased to be. The data describing its existence was wiped. It is beautiful in a way, Valen whispered. The end of all things. Not today, Thorn said. He flexed his fingers. All ships begin the movement. The fleet began to play. This was not the mournful dirge of the Othra. This was something else. This was aggressive. It was complex. It was a chaotic, thundering roar of sound and gravity that mimicked the chaotic birth of a star. It was jazz, it was heavy metal, it was classical fury all woven into a single beam of gravitational defiance. The wave struck the wall of darkness. Space-time buckled. The encroaching nothingness hit the wall of sound and stopped. The sheer density of the information contained in the Requiem wave, the mathematical complexity of the music, was acting as a barrier. The silencers tried to unravel it, to simplify it into nothing, but the music was too intricate. It shifted keys, it changed tempos, it evolved. It was alive. The humans were feeding the entropy beast a meal it couldn't digest. "Power levels holding," Vance shouted over the comms. "The darkness is receding, we're pushing it back." "Increase tempo," Thorn ordered. "Allegro con fuoco, burn the reactors." The fleet intensified the assault. The black ships glowed with an eerie violet light as the resonance chambers reached critical mass. The song became a scream of defiance, a declaration that we exist, we are here, and we will not go quietly. The wall of darkness began to fracture. Cracks of light appeared within it. Stars that had been swallowed were suddenly visible again, reality reasserting itself through the power of the harmonic stabilization. And then the twist happened. From within the darkness, a signal came back. It wasn't an attack, it was a harmony. Thorn froze, his hands hovering over the keys. "Do you hear that?" "I hear a counter-melody," Lisha whispered, checking her scanners. "It is coming from inside the entropy field." The sound was distinct. It wasn't the chaotic noise of the silencers, it was structured. It was sad, but it was also hopeful. It wove itself into the human requiem, creating a duet that spanned light years. "They aren't monsters," Thorn realized, his eyes widening. "They aren't eating the universe out of malice. They are cleaning it. They are trying to silence the noise because they are in pain." "Pain?" Valen asked. "How can a cosmic force feel pain?" "The universe is old," Thorn said, his mind racing. "It's full of the echoes of dead civilizations, the background radiation of 1,000,000,000,000 wars. It's loud. The silencers. They are the immune system. They are trying to quiet the fever. We just showed them that noise can be beautiful." Thorn changed the song. He slowed it down. He signaled the fleet to transition from the aggressive, chaotic movement to a slow, melodic adagio, a lullaby. The fleet shifted. The roaring wall of sound softened into a gentle, pulsating rhythm. It was a song of comfort, of rest. The darkness stopped fighting. It paused. The wall of erasure held still. The countermelody from within grew louder, mingling with the human song, creating a harmony that made the very hull of the eventide weep condensation. For an hour, the two forces, the creators and the erasers, sang to each other. And then slowly the darkness began to retreat, not forced back but withdrawing. It folded in on itself, fading away like a receding tide. The stars returned. The void was clear. The signal from the darkness lingered for one final moment, a complex burst of data that washed over the fleet's sensors. "What was that?" Valen asked as the silence returned to the bridge. Lisha was staring at her console, her hands shaking. It was a message, a single packet of information. "Translate it," Thorn said, slumping back in his chair, exhausted. Lisha typed the commands. The screen flickered and the translation appeared. It wasn't in Valkaran, it wasn't in Terran. It was a mathematical concept that translated to a single phrase. "The song is good, we will sleep now." The integration of humanity into the Synod was absolute. They were no longer the junior race, they were the choir masters. The fleet of black ships became the guardians of the Rim, patrolling the edges of the galaxy, not with guns, but with songs. Years later, on his deathbed, High Exarch Valen asked for Thorn. The human was old now, frail, his time in the radiation-soaked hulls of the Requiem ships finally catching up to him. "Did we win?" Valen asked, his voice a rasp. "Or did we just delay the end?" Thorn sat by the bedside, looking out at the skyline of Valkar, which was now dotted with human architecture, towers that looked like tuning forks, bridges that hum. "Ed in the wind." "There is no winning, Valen," Thorn said softly. "The universe is a dying thing. Entropy always wins in the end. The stars will burn out. The dark will return." "Then what was the point?" Valen asked, fear creeping back into his eyes. Thorn smiled and he patted the hand of the giant alien warlord. "The point isn't to stop the end, old friend. The point is to make sure that when the end comes, it sounds beautiful." Valen closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of the silence. He listened to the hum of the city, the distant thrum of the orbital ships, the heartbeat of a galaxy that had learned to sing. "A good song," Valen whispered. "The best," Thorn agreed. And as the Exarch's monitor flatlined, the city outside didn't mourn with silence. The sirens didn't wail. Instead, the great towers began to hum, a low, gentle chord that rose up into the atmosphere, carrying the soul of the leader into the dark, escorted by the music of the species that had turned the weakest ship in the fleet into the savior of the stars. The Othra drifted in the void, a rusted, broken monument, forever silent, but forever listening, the first instrument in the orchestra of the defiant living. The universe was vast and dark and cold, but it was no longer quiet.